Welcome to Season 1 of Garth and Sue Talk, a new series by Psych Sessions, where we bring up a topic of conversation and then we just riff. These are the water cooler conversations that you have with colleagues in your department. These are the chats you might have at the bar after a good day at a teaching conference. So, please pull up a seat as we talk about teaching. Here I am with Sue Franz from Highline College, where I used to teach. Sue, it seems like a lifetime ago. Does it seem like that long ago to you?
It was a lifetime ago. That was pre-pandemic.
So Sue is still at Highline College. This is Garth, and I am at Cascadia College. And this idea came to me while I was doing something a couple weeks ago, and probably thinking about my upcoming classes for fall term. And I thought about many conversations I've had with Sue in the past about teaching, about pedagogy, about thinking through student issues, pretty much everything that a mentor would talk a young faculty member through when that opportunity is given. And at Highline College, we had the opportunity to do that quite a lot. We had these wonderful weekly meetings. And so as I was thinking through things, and as I've thought through things over the years, Sue and I have talked through many things. And I thought, why not record these conversations? One of the things that shocked me, Sue, was a couple weeks ago, you and I were in an email correspondence, and you said to somebody else's question, I don't know if this is my idea or Garth's idea. It's kind of all become one thing. And at that point, I realized, this is not just a one-way conversation. We have, over the years, developed this two-way conversation about things like inner teaching, which we both do. So, it made me, I felt really good, so thanks for that. But I realized that teachers probably all over the place might appreciate some of these conversations. Does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, that sounds like a blast. All of our conversations around teaching have been a lot of fun. And I do want to clarify that for those weekly meetings at Highline, those are all department meetings. We're a department of 5 or 6, and we do meet once a week. And everybody that I've ever mentioned that to is just appalled that we could possibly have a department meeting once a week and not absolutely hate each other. And our secret is popcorn.
Always has been popcorn.
Always has been popcorn.
Microwave popcorn.
Microwave popcorn. It's a little harder to do now that we're all meeting via Zoom, but it's an opportunity for us as faculty to get together and talk about our wins and talk about our challenges. And it really is I find it to be an incredibly supportive atmosphere. So I'm glad that Garth, you and I have maintained that connection over the years, and I'm looking forward to our conversations.
Well, that is great, and I'm glad you recall it as I do, as this really positive thing. And something to say to faculty or departments who are trying to think about how they are going to develop their faculty. You get the right people in the room and meet consistently. And this is a great idea for developing the kind of teachers in particular, but probably colleagues and researchers that you want to have as a part of your department. You just can't replace that face-to-face time.
No, you really can't. And in fact, in my first job, I was the psychology department. And in fact, at that time, I was also the sociology department, which is a whole other set of issues. But at that time, I learned so much from my colleagues in the social sciences that's who we hung out with. We're the other social sciences in our building. And for all psychology stuff, I became really heavily reliant on the listservs, the psych teacher listserv from Society for the Teaching of Psychology, and the TIPS listserv, which is now defunct, but that was back in the mid-90s. So having conversations about teaching and about having conversations about teaching psychology were just just so incredibly important, especially as a young faculty member. But now, even as I'm advancing in years, it's still the best part of my job is talking about teaching with other people who love talking about teaching.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. And by the way, if folks want to hear Sue talk more about those early years and how important those listservs and interactions were, go to her Psych Sessions full episode and you can hear the whole origin story there. In a first episode, or what we're hoping will be a first episode, we do have to give kind of the context of where this is coming from, but I do want to jump in because I don't want these to be the idea is that they wouldn't be really long form, but that and it depends, I guess, where the conversation goes. But here's what I've been thinking about, Sue, and I really haven't told you much about this, I don't think, but here goes. So last year I was asked to teach a biopsychology course, and I've got no business doing that. It fell to me after like options A, B, C through N. Fell apart, and then I was asked with about 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks to the term, if I would do it, and it was that or students don't get it. They just because it's complicated, but students in our community college system, if they want to transfer to UW as a psych major, this is a course they need, and so there were students registered, and I said, okay. So I used one of the maybe the biggest bio-psych book out there on the market. I used it with my students. I needed it, honestly. I'm just adjusting sound here. I really needed it because the support was so important. I could never design that course from scratch. I don't have any business. I have business teaching. I may not have business teaching that content. So I made the most. I really focused on my teaching skill and really tried to learn along with my students as I was doing it. Okay, so here we go. It's a year later. I want a second shot at biopsych this year, and didn't like the textbook, didn't find it helpful to me, didn't find it helpful to my students, but it is the textbook. It's in its like past 10 editions. So the question is this: should I take popular books like a book we both love, which is, I always get the title wrong, but it is Tales of the Dueling Neurosurgeons. And then David Eagleman has a new book about neuroplasticity out, and it's called Live Wired. Halfway through it right now, really like it. If I can meet my learning outcomes, can I pull in popular books to teach a biopsych class, or should I rely on the history and all the people who've gone before and decided this is what's in the biopsych curriculum? Should I do that? And let me just say, while you're thinking about this question, that one of the reasons I want to talk to you about this is because your answers often surprise me, but also you don't usually go with the status quo. You often have some ideas that maybe are a little bit out of the box. So here's my conundrum. You have any thoughts?
Of course I have thoughts.
Of course.
Do you want to hear my thoughts now?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thanks.
Well, the first question is the exact same question that we've been asking in Intro Psych. What is the purpose of the course? What is it that you want students to know 5 years from now after the course is over? And with a course like this, with a course like biopsych, which is required to apply to the major at the University of Washington, is to think about what students who take biopsych are going to need for the rest of their courses. And one of the problems with textbooks that have been in many editions, we know this is an issue in Intro Psych, there's no reason to think it's not an issue in biopsych, is that once content is in, it's difficult to get it out. Because the reviewers come along and they look at the textbook and they say, you can't take this out because I teach this. You can't take this out because I teach it. But you should add this because this is an important addition to the field, and the books become encyclopedic. So I guess the first question is, since this is a 200 level course, a sophomore level course that is meant specifically, honestly, for the University of Washington undergraduate psychology major, what is it that students really need to know? And can that be conveyed through the Tales of the Dueling Neurosurgeons and Livewired? Now, having taught that course myself, also being a person who had no business teaching the course, but I taught sociology too, so I teach all kinds of courses that I have no business teaching. What would I do? I think probably the first thing that I would do is I would look at the student learning outcomes for the biopsych course at the University of Washington. What is it that they want students to walk away with? And if you can do it with these books, then I think that absolutely you should.
Yes. Okay. So that is, I thought about looking at, and when we created our learning outcomes for the course, we consulted UW's, but it is probably a good idea to go directly to UW because it's been a couple of years since we developed the outcomes for this course. Go there, see what they have. Now, I remember creating the student learning outcomes for Cascadia for this, along with a colleague who did have business. She was a adjunct faculty member, actually one of David Eagleman's students, which was funny. But we looked at a lot of student learning outcomes at different places together, and we think I have pretty good representation. So it did occur to me that it's this principle of backward design, right? You have to start with your outcomes first, and then figure out not only how you're going to get there in terms of assessments, but how you're going to get there in terms of content. So I think we're in agreement on that part. There is this kind of variable that I think about. If this was intro psych we're talking about, you and I would look at each other, and I would look at you in particular and say, listen, you have decades of experience teaching this course. You could probably use, I don't know, English literature and teach, and because you have the chops, you could talk about all the knowledge, all the studies, all the research that you've been teaching about for decades, and you could probably use no textbook and really help students understand psychological principles, and maybe even in better ways, like themes or something like that. So what I'll throw back to you is, if somebody is not proficient with the content, should they deviate from this textbook?
One of the nice things about textbooks, any textbook, is that somebody else or somebody else's have taken the literature and parsed it out and said, this is the most important stuff, and this is my understanding of this most important stuff. But we all know that all textbooks have errors in them. We all know that they may not contain the most current information. So the challenge then is, in an area that you're not familiar with, how far do you venture? I don't know that my advice would be to contact some biopsychologists, and there are some in the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, and give them the course description, give them the student learning outcomes, give them the books that you're thinking about using, and ask them, are there any holes here? And if there are, could they be plugged up with, here's a video over here, here's just some additional written text, or could they be plugged up more effectively with another trade book? I would go to the biopsych experts and say, hey, help me out on this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what needs to be done. Kind of related to one of the things you said today on Facebook in the STP group, I put in a question just about open education resources for biopsych, because one of the things I don't want to have my students do is have to buy 3 textbooks or something like that. And biopsych books are not cheap. And so I don't know, maybe because they cross into biology. I'm not sure. That just seems like they're more expensive than where like intro psych textbooks are right now, for example. But so I have been thinking about plugging those holes, but again, didn't solve the problem of, I don't know. Having taught the course once, I probably have some idea of what needs to be plugged. But those glaring, like huge holes that will sink the ship and not get students what they need. If I don't see them obviously in the SLOs or whatever, maybe somebody at in STP can tell me that. It's a really great idea. We've seen research in intro psych that just that, I don't know, depending on how you look at it, pessimistically or optimistically, that says students only remember such a percentage of course material in intro psych a year later, and I think that is like 50% or something like that. So I don't know. Some people might celebrate that. I'm not sure, but I think we're aiming for higher. We'd like to see higher, but here's what we know: when a course is taught in a certain way, the learning just doesn't happen that effectively. I'm concerned that the way that biopsychology is laid out, chapter by chapter, kind of like an intro psych textbook is, and this is the way it's been done, I'm sure, for decades and decades, that we are missing an opportunity for learning. And what I love about these books is that they're filled with case studies, and these case studies overlap. You'll find them in both the biopsych textbook and in these popular books, but these are memorable. These will stick with people. The stories will stick with them, and they will, as kind of an aside, as a bonus, they will learn about biopsychology through them. Would you agree that that's very important?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was just having a conversation earlier this morning with some colleagues about the approach that some faculty take to teaching. And for them, their approach is, I'm going to deliver this content to students. I want students to memorize it. And then I'm going to evaluate their ability to memorize on this multiple choice test or short answer test. And those kind of courses, we know, based on everything we know about how memory works, we know that that's not stuff that's going to stick with students in the long run. It's going to be the vivid examples that are in class. It's going to be anything with emotional content behind it. It's going to be stuff where they've worked with the content. The students have worked with the content, which is why you and I both love interteaching so much, is that the students are in there working with the content, not just, oh, that's memorize that definition, memorize that. They're not doing that. They're actually applying the content. So I think that the textbooks are really written toward that kind of format, where students are expected to be able to memorize definitions, maybe apply in a multiple choice question, but it's content heavy. So one of the things that you and I both love about The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons is that each chapter focuses on a different area of the brain, and you get the history behind, here's how we learned about this part of the brain, but it's delivered in such a storytelling kind of way that you can't help but become engaged with the content and learn in the process. And textbooks just are not written in that way. Good trade books are, but textbooks aren't.
Yeah. One of the things that David Eagleman writes in this Livewired book right at the beginning is, and the whole, I'm not finished with it, but the whole book is really about what we know about neuroplasticity. And what he says at the beginning is essentially when these things are taught, they are taught as these siloed content areas, and which is just not true. It's just not how you could best understand it. And some of that's my wording, but here's, I think, one of the things, and I know that I've given talks on this. I've talked with you about it. You probably told me this once upon a time. I am struggling with breaking the rules. There is some part of me that says it's irresponsible to teach in an innovative way. And part of that, I think, is responsible. I don't want to let my students down, which is, let's go back to the UW outcomes and let's make sure that we're doing that. But God, where does this voice come from that tells us that there is a right way to do this? I'm not sure. And I don't think I'm the only person plagued by it.
Well, you're not the only person plagued by it, but you're a professional. You have studied pedagogy, and we have certain rules, if you will, around content, meaning here is a course description, here are the student learning outcomes, it is your course instructor, go nuts. So on the one hand, for people who really like some guidance, that is way too much freedom. Talk about paradox of choice. But for others, it feels just right. I can really create this and give my students an experience that is going to be meaningful for them. And ultimately, that's it. You're absolutely right. There is no right way to teach. And I hope that everybody who is teaching is getting support for their way of teaching. I'm certain I told you the story of the two history professors that I knew who had very different teaching styles. One was a storyteller, and he was an excellent storyteller. In fact, he was so lecture-based, he was telling stories. Mm-hmm. He was so lecture-based that students were not permitted to ask questions during class because, as he put it, you never knew what they were going to say. His stories were prepared well in advance. He probably memorized them, but his delivery was phenomenal, and students signed up for his classes because they wanted that experience. Good TED Talks. Those are all storytellers. My other colleague couldn't deliver a decent lecture to save his life, but he was a phenomenal discussion leader. He could start students at this point, and by the end of the course, end of the class, they were so far past where it was that they began. And I don't think either one of them should have switched to the other style. They shouldn't have even mixed and matched styles. They found something that worked for them, and they did it. Now, did they cover the same content? I don't know. They were talking about U.S. history, so I'm sure that they both ended up covering important U.S. historical events, but did it in very, very different ways that were just as equally engaging for students. So in terms of how to do it, absolutely, totally up to you. In terms of what that content should be, there is no agreed upon content. The best for any course, the best that we can do is come to some agreement as faculty at our own institutions on course descriptions and student learning outcomes. And beyond that, it's academic freedom. You get to decide what content goes into your course within those parameters.
Yeah, and if you never try, if the storyteller never tried that alternative way of presenting the information, it wouldn't have turned out so dynamic for their students. If we are locked into these boxes, which are impersonal, which don't take our strengths into consideration when we are kind of entering the classroom, I think this early on for me was something that I didn't get as an educator, which is I don't want to be Sue Franz. That would be the worst thing for my students, is for me to be Sue Franz or whoever else, whatever other teacher. You really do need to find your voice, and you need to probably be creative and innovate a little bit in order to find these things that work for your students and for you. So I appreciate this conversation, Sue. Is there anything else that occurs to you that we need to talk about when it comes to this particular conversation of really sticking to textbooks and curriculum and content? Because I know this does pour over into most of what we do at the undergraduate level.
I don't think I have anything additional to add to this conversation, but I do want to reiterate that the course is yours. You were hired to teach it, and you can teach it in the best way that you know how. And using quality materials is really important. So, no, I don't think that with your level of expertise, I wouldn't recommend going out and writing your own biosite content. But you certainly know when you see good content that's engaging for students. And I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say that I am pretty certain that your students will read every page of The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons. They will probably read every page of Live Wired. Will they read every page of their biopsych textbook? Probably not.
Yeah, that's really true. And then, and I think what I felt a little bit bad about last fall getting into this, because I was reading a week or two ahead of my students, is that I had gotten them into this textbook, which was not a great platform for learning to happen. And that's what I want in all of my classes with my students. So I do think my students will thank me, and I want to thank you for sitting down, Sue. Hopefully we'll do this again soon and release it out in a mini series for listeners. So thanks.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.